All right, guys, let's discuss the front head from the turtle position. So obviously, we've covered standing front head, where we had control over the front head, but the guy was on his feet. We had 4-point front head, where we had control of the front head, but they're in the 4-point position. And now we've got front head from the turtle position. And we'll have to distinguish between the two different types of front head from turtle, on his elbows or on his hands. I would say, generally speaking, wrestlers are going to be looking to get to their hands. Jiu-jitsu guys are going to be looking to get to their elbows. A lot of wrestlers from here as well, we're looking to get to their hands, then onto their feet, walk their hands to their feet, just like we've been talking about, and back up. But obviously, although Jiu-jitsu borrows wrestling positions, we have things wrestlers don't have to worry about. For example, strangles, right? So if Placido's in the turtle with his hands on the floor, he doesn't have any way to defend front head strangles, guillotine stylist attacks. He's on his elbows. Now his hands are free to hand fight. So we're going to have to talk about how we can use the threat of strangles to distract the hands. Wrestlers have to get behind the arms with purely, obviously, wrestling style techniques, but they have to basically use go behinds to get behind. But we can combine the threat of submission with a go behind, because what I want you to remember is Placido's on his hands. He can easily throw up a block for an underhook. So if I were to try to walk around, he can catch an underhook on either side. If he's on his elbows and his hands are defending a strangle, there's nothing blocking a go behind. So that would be the key difference between jiu-jitsu and wrestling and the interplay between the two positions. But there's going to be a lot of submissions we can do from each of these spots, but the strongest front head style submission attacks are going to come from this turtle position. As Placido gains height, the chances of me securing a strong upper body submission decreases. You saw when we covered the 4-point position, we're still able to hit seated katagatame and an anaconda choke style setup from there. But again, we wouldn't go for guillotines from there. We'd go for guillotines from here. Because if I were to wrap up a guillotine on Placido here, the most I could fall is this far. And when we're slippery and sweaty, we need to minimize sort of those athletic movements of our opponent, our ability to slip off. And a guillotine from here, again, we only fall this far. A guillotine from 4-point position, if I were to hang on to it here, look at the distance I could fall. And I'm going to fatigue myself more, because me hanging onto Placido's neck from here is me holding myself up. Obviously, he's carrying weight too. But if Placido's back down on the ground here and I secure a guillotine style of attack, my body weight's going to be on the ground. So it's going to be merely strangle positioning. But these are all the things we're going to highlight in this section. But again, like I said in the introduction, you're probably thinking, why is Craig Jones teaching me wrestling? But although we're using wrestling techniques and positions, we are going to be covering how we can use jiu-jitsu techniques to beat wrestlers. Let's further expand on the differences between wrestling and jiu-jitsu, really based on what responses they give from these positions, right? So obviously I have a lot more experience dealing with what jiu-jitsu guys do from these positions, especially in the scope of ADCC. ADCC submission grappling, when we pass either the halfway point of the match or we go into overtime, which is very common in ADCC rules, you can't just sit to guard. They want us to have a bit of a takedown battle, but they have this rule where you have to have shot a real takedown, and if it fails, you're allowed to pull guard. But their definition of a real shot is basically you fight for it for 3 seconds. So generally speaking, what can happen in ADCC is Placido shoots on me, I start to sprawl, we have this battle from here, and then he pulls half guard from here. So he starts to get inside position and sits back, and now he's successfully pulled guard in an ADCC scope from basically putting himself in a front head position. Whether that means he shoots and keeps the leg and sits to half guard, or whether he shoots, I sprawl my leg out completely, control the front head momentarily, and he sits to half guard. I will say that is a very common way people pull guard anyway in a jiu-jitsu scene, because obviously half guard, especially people as they get older play a lot more half guard. Half guard's probably the most common guard. So a lot of guys, the easiest way for them to pull half guard is just shoot a single leg and fall back into it. Whether that means it fails and it gives them a front head and then they have to get the half guard back, or again, whether they from the single leg can pull half guard. So when we deal with jiu-jitsu guys from front head, the most common reaction is always going to be to pull half guard. When we deal with guys, wrestlers, and obviously if you watch freestyle wrestling, they're not going to be pulling half guard, they're going to be losing the match, but they're going to have multiple style escapes from this position. So we'll look at a couple of these just to keep them in your mind. So a common one would be an elbow pass. So remember when we're talking about positioning, if I want to grab a chin strap and I want to pull my elbow as far away as possible, the deeper my elbow is, the easier it's going to be for Placido to start passing that elbow by and clearing the front head, potentially reversing it, right? Another one would be an arm drag style escape. So Placido will start building high, but again, he's still going to get control of that elbow. He's going to reach through for an arm drag and pull me through. Another great one wrestlers will do is from the front head, they'll do a sit out. And they'll obviously be doing a sit out to the side of the elbow grip and not the chin strap. So they have to get their head to that side. And as they hit that sit out, they can get behind us. So because we're still in the early days of jiu-jitsu and wrestling merging together as one sport, generally speaking, guys will have a base in wrestling style escapes from the front head or jiu-jitsu style escapes. So what we're going to cover from this front head position is how to sort of take advantage of the vulnerabilities in each sport to further our position, potentially submission or position. And I'm going to show you how we can do that for each of those sport responses. But ultimately, after watching this section, you have an understanding of both those areas of expertise and you'll combine them together to really implement a new style of game from offensive front headlock positions. All right, let's talk about how jiu-jitsu guys basically try to pull half guard off the shot, or they try to pull half guard off a stuffed shot, and obviously a stuffed shot would lead to the front head position, right? If I try to stay on a chin strap when Placido pulls half guard, you're gonna see what happens, right? So we're in this front head, we've got our good positioning, shallow chin strap, elbow grip. If I stay here on Placido and he slides in, I ends up having to hand pose and going over the top, and Placido wins the inside position. And obviously from here, he's got a great half guard position. I can't even throw in a wizard. My hands are glued to the mat. What we need to do is we need to take a somewhat of a scoop grip. It looks like a scoop grip from the front head, but it really turns into an underhook. And it's especially true if we do not let go of the elbow tie. So we've got an elbow tie and a chin strap. The chin strap hand becomes a scoop grip. So as Placido pulls, he's pulling basically an underhook for me, giving me dominant half guard positioning, right? So we're in our front head. My chin strap hand is transferring to an underhook. It's an underhook, but it looks kind of like a scoop grip here, but you'll see as Placido pulls half guard, he gets that knee to knee connection. He does a shift. He's giving me a perfect underhook from here. Whereas had I stayed on the chin strap, I would be falling forward onto my hands here. So again, these movements in the context of competition look very, very quick and unreachable. But because, like I said, jiu-jitsu, wrestling are in the early stages of merging based on who our opponent is, and really based on the rule set and the time in the match of that rule set, we can sort of make assumptions about what our opponents are going to do. I know Placido is basically pure grappling base, right? So I know that we're in an ADCC match and he's shooting before the points period. I know he's probably shooting to pull guard. So that way he can negate getting a negative point. However, if we're dealing with wrestlers coming across from jiu-jitsu, we know that if they shoot and we stuff them, they're realistically not going to want to give up bottom position. So the best way to think about it is look at who your opponent is and make an assumption, or your training partner, make an assumption on, does this guy want to avoid bottom position at all costs? Or is this guy very comfortable on the bottom? And you could sort of start to understand what they're going to do from the front head. So again, if I have Placido on the front head and I know he is a grappling base, I know Placido's got a good guard, so he wants to play on bottom and he doesn't want to risk getting submitted just to get back up. That's what I would say. I'd say wrestlers, guys that avoid bottom position, are happy to risk fighting out of front head submissions rather than ending up on their back because they're not comfortable from that position. But say a guy like Placido who's comfortable from here, I know I should already be getting this scoop underhook grip. And you can see I've already got the elbow, so we can start to flatten him out and hit straight into a knee cut. So this scoop grip's really going to save you within the context of who do you have in front head. You know what I mean? Guys are going to give you different responses. If they pull half guard off a scoop, they're giving you a perfect underhook half guard passing position. Whereas again, wrestlers probably not going to be looking to pull half guard from there. Think about it. If Nicky Rod's shooting on you, is he shooting to pull or is he shooting to pick you up and slam you? All right, let's talk about the wrestling mindset from the front head position, how it's different to the jiu-jitsu mindset. So again, jiu-jitsu guys, because we have to worry about strangles, if Placido's in turtle and I imagine I'm in the front head, typically they stay on their elbows because they want their hands free. But if I'm trying to come and attack the neck, he can hand fight me, right? So again, that's the jiu-jitsu mindset. But wrestlers, generally speaking, they understand that the higher they get off the ground, the less vulnerable they are to scoring positions in wrestling. So they're constantly trying to climb for height. And no matter what that entails, it always entails getting up to two hands. Really, how they build height from here is two hands, and then Placido can go into a 4-point position. Again, walk his hands or just start posturing straight back up. But again, now you can see the difference between jiu-jitsu and wrestling. And that is that when the hands are on the ground, there's nothing to prevent me threatening front head guillotines, high wrist style attacks from here. So that to me is the fundamental difference. Jiu-jitsu guys, elbows, looking to pull half guard, defend strangles, wrestlers, getting to the hands to do their series of escapes, whether that's an elbow pass, whether that's an arm drag, or whether that's a sit out. You're not going to hit a sit out from your elbows. You're going to hit a sit out once you start building some height. You can start sitting through. You're not going to hit any sort of meaningful elbow drag on your elbows. You're not going to hit any sort of meaningful arm drag escape from your elbows. You're going to come up to a hand. They all involve height. So you can already see the difference between jiu-jitsu and wrestling and really the potential vulnerabilities for doing these wrestling style escapes in a jiu-jitsu context. So again, I'm not here to teach you how to beat wrestlers at wrestling. I'm here to teach you how to beat wrestlers within a jiu-jitsu scope. So again, if I have Placido in the front head and he starts coming up to hands, we can start threatening front head attacks. And then he might drop back to his hands, back to his elbows to start fighting. And that gives us a chance to exploit these positions here. So again, remember that. If you remember only one thing from this section, is that a jiu-jitsu guy is generally going to stay on the elbows. A wrestler is going to be climbing for height. But there are vulnerabilities between the two positions, and that's what we're going to get into now, where we look at submissions and how they chain into go behinds to the back. All right, so we covered sort of the jiu-jitsu mindset from the front head position. We covered the wrestling mindset. We sort of explained what's different between the two. But obviously, for us to get off some meaningful attacks from here, we still have to be able to control the position. So I just want to retouch on the fundamentals from here and how we can use that to prevent a 4-point position. In my opinion, the two biggest mistakes people make, jiu-jitsu guys make against guys with wrestling pace, is the depth of the chin strap elbow and also the positioning of where they hold the opposite arm, right? So first of all, let's look at the chin strap. Again, we know an elbow pass is a legitimate threat. So what we need to do is make sure that this elbow is shallow. A lot of people are so caught up with a strong chin strap that their elbow stays close. So if we switch the angle here, a lot of the time guys will be so caught up with a chin strap, their elbow will be here. Look how easy that is for Placido to reach. He can start climbing for high with his other arm, and he can start getting that elbow grip. So you want to take the most shallow chin strap grip you can, and sometimes that'll involve actually turning his head. So I just want you to, instead of having a deep elbow, I want you to have a shallow elbow. Now when Placido's trying to reach that elbow, it's much, much harder, and if he does try to elbow pass, he's pushing it into his head rather than, if we come back, rather than pushing it past. Or doing a sit out or pushing it past elbow pass.
Sorry. No fault.
So let's talk about the hand position of the other arm, right? So now we'll switch around. So what we know is that if Placido wants to build height, he wants to come up to a hands here. So he wants his elbows basically level. So a common mistake people make is they hold the shoulder here. If I hold the shoulder and pull, Placido can still come up to a hand relatively easily. And even if he does come up, I don't have too much control here. I can't pull this arm from the shoulder and get this wrist to move. And obviously we know for control, I have to grip above the elbow. If I grip below, there's a good chance he's just gonna strip it, right? So we grip below, I'm trying to pull, he can pull it out. If I grip at the shoulder, I don't really have much strength to move his arm here. If I grip at the elbow, just above the elbow, I can keep him down, right? So think about this. We've got a perfect chin strap here. I pull his arm to his head. Now Placido keeps trying to get back up. We can keep him down. If I had the armpit here, Placido could probably elbow pass immediately off of that grip. And we lose everything. So we want to keep him down. We have to grip the elbow. So I want you to practice this sort of in the context of drilling. Don't go hard, but think of it as a bit of a game where your goal is to maintain control on the person you have the front head in, on your training partner. And I want your training partner to be trying to do elbow passes, trying to climb back up, trying to consolidate a 4-point. And I want you to think about constantly pulling this elbow forward. If I've got control of Placido here and he's trying to stand up, he's vulnerable, his base is jeopardized. Again, if I've got control of the elbow here, he's pretty strong here. We're not going to be able to consolidate and keep it down. So again, we want to take a shallow chin strap. We want to be hiding our elbow from them so that they can't elbow pass. And even if that means we have to turn the chin slightly, I want to be grabbing the elbow, trying to pull it to his chin and ear here. And I want you to practice every time they get up. I want you to practice keeping them down. And once you have that sort of control, you're really going to basically scare people from taking shots on you because they're going to understand that it's very difficult to get out of your front headlock. Whereas if your front headlock control is very weak, especially from the turtle position, guys are going to have no fear shooting on you. We want to punish them for their shots. If they're a jiu-jitsu guy and they shoot, we want to have that scoop grip. So instead of pulling half guard, they're pulling us into a pass. If they're a wrestler, we don't want them to believe that they can just shoot, escape, shoot again until they get their takedown. We still, although we're from different sports, want to be able to punish them, keep weight on them because of poor shots that allowed us to secure the front headlock. All right, let's look at the single most threatening move you can hit wrestlers with. Because again, we're going from the context of what wrestlers like to do. We can make assumptions about what attacks will work on them based on what reactions we know they have. Again, we've discussed jiu-jitsu guys generally going to stay on elbows, defend strangles. They're going to be pulling half guard. Wrestlers are going to be climbing to hands. They're going to be coming off of the elbows. And again, on the elbows, we can defend strangles. They're going to be coming up to hands and hitting sit-outs, arm drags, elbow passes. So we know that that's what they want to do. And what we also know is that when they're on their hands, they cannot defend strangles. It's not as easy for them to defend strangles. And this is where we want to hit the high wrist guillotine, right? So I should explain what all the guillotines are first. A lot of people think there's two guillotines. There is a high elbow, which is basically made famous by Marcelo Garcia, which we bring that elbow over the top and there's no arm inside. And we're creating a strangle exactly from here. We also have the arm in guillotine, which is basically made famous by Renzo Gracie. He figured out a way to land a guillotine with an arm inside. The two most common guillotines. I would say each of the guillotines has vulnerabilities. Marcellotine style, the high elbow, has a vulnerability that when I sit back to attack, I have to ensure that I get some sort of control on the body, whether that's from a half guard position with a leg over the top, because it's very hard to stop rotation here. Placido can start to rotate, and I have to try to trap him, maybe come up to mount. With the arm in guillotine, we have vulnerabilities here, especially against strong opponents, because the arm in guillotine relies on my ability to bend Placido's neck. So when I hit this arm in, if Placido forehead posts on the ground and has a strong neck, now he's using the ground as reinforcement to make it difficult for me to finish. If he didn't have his head on the ground, we could pull it in and start to get the tap. So they both have vulnerabilities. I would say against a seasoned, strong grappler, the arm in guillotine can be difficult because, again, if he forehead posts, he can limit our ability to strangle him. And obviously, if we're talking about killing wrestlers here, wrestlers, although vulnerable early in their career to an arm in style guillotine, once they understand how to defend it, they come from a sport that builds strong necks. They're always getting collar tie, always getting pulled down. They have strong necks. That's going to make it hard to attack. And in terms of the high elbow, they can be hard. They can be easy to defend because of rotation. You have to ensure you get no arm in and your legs around your opponent in such a meaningful way that you control their movement. So both have vulnerabilities. And if you look at competition footage, you'll see both being exploited. What we're going to look to do is something called a high wrist guillotine. So that, say we secure a front head and Placido immediately starts coming up to hands. Now we've got free pass to drag our chin strap hand super deep. So we were here hiding an elbow pass, but now we want to give too much of an elbow pass. So I want you to see, so we were shallow. This hand is going to travel so deep that my thumb is ultimately going to end up here. The beauty of this style of strangle is that my hand is hidden. So when we come up here, Placido can't reach the hand. He can't hand fight from here. So my hand is hidden up here against my own chest. It's impossible for him to reach this. But again, that's not all we can do, because basically I'm giving him an elbow pass. So when we go for this, there's going to be a secondary grip that's important, because if I just do this, Placido can elbow pass and take me out. How do we prevent an elbow pass? We have to keep them square to us. That's why we're going to slide up and go deep into the armpit here. Because again, we're not trying to now put him back down. I'm quite happy for him to stay on this hand, because while they're on their hand, they're not grip fighting. So our secondary hand slides up and gets deep, and I trap his armpit to my chest. So now when Placido tries to elbow pass, he's stuck, he can't change angles. So we're creating a wedge, an open wedge. You could do it with closed fists, but I want this hand trapped to your chest, this hand inside, and your shoulder trapped to their shoulder. So now we've controlled movement with open grips, and generally closed grips are going to be stronger. But from here, basically both grips are out of range for him to fight. The weakness of open grips is if they can connect to it and split the hands. But again, this hand's hidden and this one's shelved basically under this armpit. So we're in our front head, Placido's on two elbows. He comes up to his hands. We take this opportunity to slide our elbow grip deep. So I'm basically cupping my elbow to his armpit. At the same time, we bring this hand high. But the key to getting this hand high is a center line shift. So my right ear was on Placido's right side. I bring my left ear on Placido's left side. So you see all this happen at once. And now Placido's trying to elbow pass. He's trying to survive from here. All we need to do to finish is sit away from him and do our best to bend their neck. And we get that tap. Because of the positioning of our grips, we still rely on bending Placido's neck, but by the time Placido hits the ground, it's the top of his head on the ground. If it was his forehead, he can have a straight spine and make it difficult to bend the neck. But because of the way our grips are lined up, and we've got the top of his head on the ground, it's already past the point of reinforcement. So look at it from a few different angles. The Placido's on his elbows. We're pulling him down, he starts to come up. Center line shift, and we pummel our grips deep. You'll see that Placido cannot elbow pass. He cannot reach the strangle hand, and we're free to sit back. And I want you to watch when I sit him back, it's the top of his head that hits the floor. And we get a really, really clean strangle from that. And again, this is a move that we know works on wrestlers because we can make assumptions about their responses. If we look at their 3 escapes, 3 most high percentage escapes, none of them happen from here. They happen from here. And this is the biggest distinction between jiu-jitsu and wrestling. The fact that jiu-jitsu guys, wrestlers might look at a jiu-jitsu guy and be like, you're never going to get out of front head while you're in the elbows. And they'd be right in a wrestling context. But we have to stay on our elbows to a certain extent to prevent these strangles. I could get the high risk guillotine when Placido's on his elbows. But you're going to see there's a good chance if he's quick, he could grab the strangle hand as I make the center line shift. And now I've lost that strangle hand. But that's fine because now his hands are occupied and I can start making a go behind to get to his back. We're going to cover in more detail how we could use the threat of strangles to get to the go behind. But I firstly want to talk about a couple more grips we can do with the high risk guillotine, right? So you guys had an open style grip here. You're hugging the armpit, pulling it tight so they can't do an elbow pass sort of reversal. And we're keeping our hands open. We can also do Gordon Ryan's variation, which he turns an open grip into a closed grip. And that also very, very strong. So basically everything's the same. They come up, you do the center line shift, but instead of just hugging this arm here, you grab your own hand. Sorry, you grab your own elbow. But from this point, everything's the same. We're trying to drive the top of the head into the ground and bend that neck. And we're gonna get a super, super clean strangle. So again, instead of open grips, we're taking a closed grip. And what's great about this variation is, again, his hand fighting ability is limited because we've got a reinforced grip. Very difficult for Placido to do anything here. And it's still difficult for him to elbow pass because we've still moved our left arm under the shoulder to trap him square on. There is also a third variation of the grip. And this one's probably best for guys with short arms. If you have short arms, short stocky arms, it can be difficult to reach your elbow. It can even be difficult to get a meaningful grip under the armpit, like in the first demonstration. What people with short arms can do is they can reach for this far lat here. So we can still get a very powerful strangle by reaching for the far lat. So Placido comes up, we lock it up, and we grab that armpit here. It just gives us a bit of control because we don't have as good a control as this side because that absolutely prevents the elbow pass. But we can hold on to him for a sec and still dive back and get that same strangle because we're holding him in such a way that's going to keep him square. I will say I find when I hold the lat on top there, guys have a better ability to immediately start rolling. So that's something I want you to be prepared for. And that's what we're going to show as well right now. So again, just the 3 grips. Placido comes up. We can center line shift and hug the elbow. We can center line shift and grab our own elbow. So you can either grab their elbow, a real tight cuff, our own elbow, or if you're challenged with short arms, you can grab the armpit. So we're gonna fall back and we're gonna try to put the head on the ground. Sometimes guys will roll here. The key here is don't roll over your shoulders. Placido's probably gonna bridge and come on top and get above me. The trick is to roll over your own forehead to remain on top. It'll be a very, very tight variation. So as I sit back, Placido starts to roll, I forehead post and hop to the other side. And we get a flush strangle from mount. So when you roll and you don't fall flat back and try to roll on top. Fall onto your forehead and try to maintain some height. So we push off our toes and switch hips, and we can cut them off to secure the strangle. Specifically for this variation of the armpit grip. So let's look at that one from a couple more angles. So we've got our center line shift grips. We hug the armpit, we hug our elbow, or again, if we've got short arms, we can hug their far armpit. So when we sit back, they start to roll. Forehead post, hop, take mount, and start sitting to another hip. We're going to get a very tight strangle, and they're also not going to be able to take advantage of the fact that we're rolling to our back, and they can take advantage of that escaping, ending in top position. You can see if I lost the guillotine there, he's still giving me the mount position. So again, that's your best friend against wrestlers. We know they're not going to hang out here. They're going to hang out here. So we can take advantage of that by getting a free shot at a high wrist guillotine. All right, so we covered in terms of the vulnerability of wrestlers. When wrestlers are on their hands, they have no ability to hand fight strangles, right? But that doesn't mean you should stay on your elbows per se either, because you're going to see there has to be a reason wrestlers are on their hands, right? And not just to mention just their escapes, but it is also improved mobility. So let's do a visual demonstration of this. So he's in a turtle, but he's on his hands wrestling style, right? Placido is trying to track my movement, and I just walk at a moderate speed. It's very difficult to get behind the hands. If we contrast this with Placido on his elbows, and I walk at the same speed, you can see that his mobility is much, much weaker, right? So I don't want people to misconstrue what I'm saying with this instructional product that jiu-jitsu superior to wrestling. I'm saying that we can borrow from each of them to create a better, more modern system of grappling. You know what I mean? This doesn't need to be combative. We just need to borrow from each art and use whatever works. So again, just to summarize, wrestlers, when you're on your hands, cannot hand fight strangles, but it is also much harder to make a go behind attempt. So when they're on their elbows, much harder to strangle because they can hand fight, but it's also, they're in a much weaker position to be mobile and defend angles. So that says that we can throw combinations at our opponents to get where we want to end up. So let's say Placido's on his hands and I go for a high wrist. But obviously, like most things in jiu-jitsu, we rarely hit something flush the first time. We have to throw combinations to get ahead and actually beat high-level opponents. So the second I start transferring to a high wrist, Placido drops to two elbows and he gets a hold of my hand. What I can do then, because obviously we know he's not as agile, is I can turn this into a go behind. His hands are distracted. He's not ready to underhook me. If he was on his hands here and I did this exact same thing and started trying to turn around, he's either going to get an underhook or I just won't get him, just keep squaring back up to me. So we know that, right? So we can throw a combination. Again, he's on his hands, so we go for the high wrist. He defends the high wrist. We place our body weight on top and I take a post on his elbow here. I take the post on the elbow because I want to be able to circle behind him without losing my position, without him coming up to an elbow and retaking an underhook. I place my other hand behind the armpit and I start to circle behind Placido here, taking perfect position. So again, conceptually, these are the things I want you to think about, right? If Placido remains on his hands here, expecting a strangle, sorry, he remains on his elbows here, expecting a strangle, we can just place our body weight on top and go for the same go behind. So I want you to use what's useful at the necessary moment based on what they're doing to defend what they think you're trying to attack next. All right, so we briefly touched on a go behind and the dilemma with wrestlers based on hand and elbow position, right? But we need to cover what not to do and what would be a common mistake in a go behind. This technique in jiu-jitsu is called makikomi. In wrestling, it's called the Peterson roll. So if you can only remember one thing about this scene, remember that don't grab the waist until you're behind the hips. So let's just say I hit the most basic go behind, right? I do a chest weight transfer. I get my weight in Placido's back. I do a pass off, elbow post. So we were here, we switch to here. We hit this one in the armpit and slide it down to the elbow. If I were to grab Placido's hips in this square stance here, if I reach through and grab his hips, especially how I'm doing it so deep, Placido immediately just needs to grab my hand, roll inside, and I'm gonna fly over the top. And that's one of those moves that you're so close to a good position. It's like a heartbreaking thing to happen, but you need to be aware of it, right? It's the makikomi in jiu-jitsu is a really beginner move that's taught. A lot of instructors teach it, but they sort of teach it in the wrong context. They'll be talking about turtle position. They'll talk about turtle position when you've already beaten the arms, and they'll say, be careful reaching too deep. But really, in reality, very few people get caught with that. They get caught with it in transition. They get caught with it off a go behind. Typically, their opponent will make an assumption that that's the first grip they're going to reach for, and as soon as they reach for it, we go. Again, if we taught this in isolation, a lot of jiu-jitsu guys will teach it like, we're in this position, be careful reaching too deep, keep it shallow, but really even here, Placido's going to pick this hand up. He's going to pull it deeper, and he's going to roll me through. But again, jiu-jitsu moves work particularly well based on the surprise of the move. So if you were sitting here on someone, you're already here, and you see them starting to reach with this hand, it's easy to hide that hand. So in isolation, this is a low percentage move. But in combination with a go behind, it's really a brilliant move, because we hit our basic go behind, I get over ego, and he throws me through. Basically, I'm holding that hip in a meaningful way that sticks me to him. So the rule is, don't grab the hip until you're behind the hip. Sorry, don't grab basically the side waist, the hip bone there, until your entire body's behind the hips. So if I get behind Placido here and we make the transfer, and now I grab the hip and Placido is to do it, basically meaningless, right? So when we have this knee pinch and we're behind the hips, that's the time to go for it, not here. Don't pull yourself into position. When you make the transfer, stay on top and make this transfer into the rear. But that would be something you need to understand. Again, very few people are good at it. There are guys out there that are amazing scramblers, like Gary Tonin. And Gary Tonin is brilliant because he makes these simple moves that you learn in beginner jiu-jitsu work at the highest level, because he uses them at the right time. He catches people by surprise when they make mistakes like this. And guys that train, like there's very few Gary Tonins, so very few people hit these moves on them in the gym, especially when they're training for high level competition. But again, it's something that needs to be said. Don't reach for the hip until you're behind their hips. All right, guys, so let's talk about a knee block, go behind, right? So obviously the biggest challenge in going behind an opponent is going to be beating the arms, right? So in the initial one, the very basic, most beginner go behind, we use the hand and basically a pass off to beat this arm. As in, we kept something in the way so that Placido can't retract it and take an underhook. So we need to block this, but we can also use our leg to block this, right? So I'm making space for my knee to get into this gap here by pulling the elbow, which is good. It's a good habit anyway, because if Placido is trying to stand back up, that's how we keep him down in this turtle position. That's how we prevent him 4-pointing from here. So when we make that space, we replace it with our knee inside, right? So now if Placido's trying to take an underhook with this arm that's trapped, it's blocked, yeah? So we've used our knee to block him preventing this go behind. Now again, just like we talked about in the basics, a mistake from here would be to reach for the hip because he's gonna hit the Makikomi or the Peterson roll. And again, I find with the knee block go behind, because we're doing a go behind so shallow to step our knee in, very, very tempting to reach for the hip. Other variations of go behind, we end up further behind the arms and it's less tempting. But in particular, especially the knee block go behind, you could be falsely tempted into reaching for the hip too early. So what I want you to do is when you step behind, I want you to reach for the butt here. So we can hold on to the butt to pull us into position. Because remember, we want to get behind the hips. So once we get to that butt cheek grip, I use forward pressure to pull Placido forward until we can start to get behind the hips here. So we've got our chin strap, we've got our elbow grip, we pull to make space, and I step in. Now Placido cannot take an underhook here to prevent this go behind. I'm taking a grip on the butt cheek here, pulling it forward, and using that to get behind Placido to successfully complete the go behind. So obviously, you've got to be very careful with finger placement there. I know wrestlers can be very partial to a deeper sort of go behind. Placido was encouraging me to do that in this scene, but unfortunately, I'm not going to do that for him. All right, guys, let's talk about what can happen when we do go for the knee block, right? So obviously, they can counter the knee block. Perhaps we're too slow on the knee block, and they can try to free that arm, right? So understanding the knee block, we've made the space, we've pulled this arm out of the way, we've placed basically a stopper behind so that way I'm free to transfer behind the hips without running into an underhook. Again, if I didn't do the knee block and I try to make the same movement, this underhook is going to block me, potentially reverse me, right? So Placido understands that. So he understands that he needs to free that arm. If he frees that arm, he's back in the game. The way he can free that arm is to basically start squaring back up to me. Starts cutting an angle, and now suddenly his arm's free and we're back to the beginning. But again, he has a vulnerability here because to increase mobility, he basically needs to be light on his hands and elbows here, and that's going to expose his neck. So when we step through and we take this block here, as Placido starts creating mobility, I can pass the head off and get a deep, high wrist guillotine and sit back, finishing just as we have always done, getting the top of the head to the floor. So we're doing a pass off here, right? So chin strap, typically a high wrist. We're going to land the high wrist with that hand that's got a chin strap, because obviously the chin strap's here, we can pass it through. But again, with the element of surprise here, Placido is not expecting a high wrist with the chin strap, with the opposite hand to the chin strap hand. So he's momentarily distracted in this sequence. If anything, he's expecting a threat of strangle with the hand with the chin strap. So he's neglecting my other hand as it starts transferring away, and we can pass the head to the other side, leaving space to throw that high wrist attack in. But again, we're creating a dilemma here, right? So now, if you've hit both the knee block go behind on your training partner, we've also hit the knee block counter to high wrist. Now Placido is in a position where does he want to merely give me the back and play it from there, because obviously he's still in the battle, or does he want to risk getting submitted with a high wrist? He cannot defend both at the same time. So we created a dilemma that's going to, if anything, slow Placido down as he tries to make good decisions from a bad situation. All right, guys, so the knee block go behind because of the depth of the entry, right? So like if we compare it to some other ones. So like when we have our basic pass off, I'm ending up much deeper on Placido, well, deeper in a sense of where I want to end up. If I do the knee block go behind, you're gonna see that because we are placing our knee to block the arm, I end up quite shallow on Placido. And if I were to start heading to the back, I've got a lot of room to go to get behind the hips so that we can start attacking. So in that sense, what the knee block go behind leads to very easily is a crucifix because we're already right there. I would be very careful, generally speaking, of a knee block of just going to straight to a seatbelt because the seatbelt's very limited against guys with a wrestling base. Because if I just grab the seatbelt, Placido can 4-point. It's hard for me to keep him down. Sometimes I'll fall off. Sometimes Placido will just be able to pummel an underhook. So in that sense, we have to be careful going to a seatbelt from there. But going to a crucifix is another story, right? Because if I take a wrist control here, immediately, especially if I pull it in, Placido goes to 4-point. He can't hand post it. He basically only 3-point because he's got one hand free, right? So let's say we eliminate this hand from the equation because again, he needs the hand on the ground to 4-point. So we have eliminated it by cupping it. We can eliminate the other arm by hooking it. And now when he's trying to 4-point, much, much tougher, right? He doesn't have any hands to post on, which again goes back to the dilemma between jiu-jitsu guys and wrestling guys, and that is jiu-jitsu guys stay on their elbow, wrestling guys get up on their hands. So again, wrestling escapes involve hand posts. Basically, I would consider a 4-pointer wrestling style escape. So now we've eliminated that through the use of a crucifix. From here, I would say the biggest mistake people make is, first of all, is going for a seatbelt rather than a wrist control. But the second escape is they think, oh, I'm just gonna roll forward and force Placido over the top. But there's space for his head to pummel out. And then we've basically given up an excellent position for, obviously, bottom position, right? So the trick here is once we've secured our hooks, is I'm gonna forehead post here to put all my weight on the back of Placido's head. We wanna force him to roll. I don't wanna roll off of Placido here. So we've secured the arm, we've secured his other arm with our legs. We're coming through and I basically reached through for a strangle style grip. Obviously, the chances of me getting deep enough here to really finish him is probably pretty slim, especially against a good opponent. But we just come here for control. And a control that when we land in a better position can immediately become a strangle. So we forehead post. And you can already see what it's doing to Placido's body. He's starting to roll. I'm hooking with the outside leg, and with the inside leg, just hip switch, and we can pull them over the top. When we time this just right, we can even land straight into a body triangle if your legs are long enough with the arm trapped. And again, because we had our hand locked and loaded, it's ready to strangle our training partner here. So let's try some different angles. So again, remember why I'm recommending this from the knee lock is because of the depth. We're not deep behind the hips, we're narrow near the arms. And because we're narrow near the arms, we're going to be vulnerable to 4-point tripods because our weight's here. He's not on the hips. If our weight is entirely here, Placido can start to lift his hips with the use of his hands and start to get up. His ability to get high is limited when he's trapped on his elbows, or they're eliminated, and that's what the crucifix does. And we're obviously close to the arms because our weight distribution's here by the pure logic of using the knee block over. So again, we make that space and we block it. Immediately, I reach for the far wrist and I take my outside leg and I scoop up that arm and place my knee on the floor. So now you can see if Placido is trying to tripod, he might be able to start lifting his hips, but there's no way he's going to get correct height because he can't put his hands on the floor. We've got our two dominant grips here. We take our hands and we start to bring it across his neck or his face. Like obviously if he's tucking his chin, that's okay. We can still come in front of the face and start looking for the other shoulder. We do not just roll. Placido's going to pop his head out. So what we do is we drop to our head and we hip switch. But we dive our head deep to force Placido to roll. And we pull him through. And generally speaking, if your legs are long enough, you can keep the arm trapped in. Or if not, just keep the arm trapped like this and start attacking the strangle immediately. Because again, these were the grips we had. That's very close to start threatening rear naked strangle. So let's have a look at it from one more angle. And I want you to pay close attention to how I scoop the arm up with my leg. I use my heel near the wrist to drag it up, and I place my knee on the ground to scoop it. And it is only my outside knee that scoops the leg, not the inside knee. So we catch that arm and we scoop it up. I've shelved it now. Placido tries to pull that arm out. It's at an unnatural angle for him to pull out. We take the arm across the face or under the neck if possible. We forehead dive and then hip switch and trap that arm if your legs are long enough. And we can come straight into our strangles because the hand is already ready and close by. And that is how we would take the back from the knee block go behind. I would say you can pursue to a deeper back position from the knee block go behind, but just by the nature of that style of go behind, you're already near the upper body. So why not immediately attack the upper body? And we can use other go behinds to get deeper penetration behind them. All right, guys, let's talk about using an arm drag grip to go behind, right? So obviously we had the basic pass off block, we had the knee block, but an arm drag grip also works very, very well to hit a go behind. So let's try to understand why that would be the case. Let's face this way. So we got our chin strap and we got our elbow block, right? So again, getting past this arm, or even really the other arm, is our big obstacle to get into the back. Because again, as we come around, if I don't control the arm, Placido gets an underhook. If I can grab an arm drag style grip, Placido tries to block me from going behind. He can't really take his arm off the ground in a meaningful way. And if he does try to explode with that, he gets pulled forward. And again, pulling him forward is very useful to us because the deeper we are behind them, the less options they have to counter or escape, or even really stand back up. So what we need to do is we're going to let go of the chin strap and it's going to come inside. So don't try and do this with the arm inside because the head, don't try and do this with the head inside because the head can get in the way of the drag. Whereas if the head's outside, we've got a clean drag past, right? So we're on top, we're going to let go of the chin strap and get a chest weight connection here. And as we turn, we pull. And Placido cannot take an underhook with this. If we didn't have this grip, again, that underhook is going to cause us a lot of problems. So we do this transfer of our chest to their back to keep weight on them. As I drag, I grab his butt cheeks here to keep weight forward, and we can transfer to get a good go behind position here. Again, we're grabbing that butt because if we do grab the hip and Placido connects, we're going over the top. So it's a really high percentage go behind, and for the purposes of jiu-jitsu and controlling our opponents, it gets us that appropriate level of depth. And again, against explosive guys, if we do have this grip and they start to bring their arm up, it's going to be detrimental for them. They're harder to move from here if they remain on their elbow. But if they remain on their elbow, they stay still, but it gives us a lever to pull ourselves into position. And again, if they try to lift their arm, we pull them into the position we're looking for. So we're taking our perfect front head, we're letting go of the chin strap, we're making a chest back connection, and again, we're circling and we're grabbing the butt cheek here, and we can bump them forward if we have to get behind the hips before we start grabbing too deep a grip here. So that right there is the arm drag go behind. Again, a very safe one that eliminates their ability to take an underhook and allows us safe passage to the back. All right, guys, let's talk about trapping their arm with our head. So again, we have options for go behinds, where the three we've covered so far were a block, and we're gonna come around. We had the arm drag, and we also had a knee block. But we can also use our head. It's kind of like using a head as a block. So we could place our head inside to block this arm from scoring an underhook, and we could start to circle to the back. But what's sort of crucial to this knee block this head block, is that we get control over this over this leg. Because as we circle, even if my head's inside and Placido keeps circling, we're basically going to stay in a neutral position. So I have to reach for that leg. And I can reach for that leg because initially my hand's blocking this arm from moving, but as my head comes inside, my head is blocking this arm. So we've got the head, basic chin strap, we've got our elbow pass. I start walking and placing my head inside. Now my head is blocking Placido's arm, so I can let go with my elbow grip. And I can reach for this ankle. And the trick to walking fast is I walk on my side. If I stay square, it's gonna be slow moving. So I turn on my side, my head comes in, and we trap the leg. Placido tries to move from here. It's going to be very, very difficult. Now to consolidate this grip, I'm going to use my foot to replace my hand. So my foot steps where my hand is, it pulls and my knee goes into position, and my head can pop out and we can come into the top. If we're worried about them getting height straight away, as you let go of the chin strap and Placido goes to 4 point, we can smack the elbow to get some weight back on top. But the beauty of this go behind is that I can reach for the hip immediately because I'm already behind it. So some key details are we're free to grab the leg because our head's blocking his arm. Our head replaces what we did in previous go behinds with the arm drag, and the knee block. So as my head comes in, I can let go and grab this leg. Now Placido's fighting to move here. He's stuck. We can step over the leg. We replace that grip, take the hip. If he starts coming up, smack the elbow to get behind the hips. and secure our rear body lock. So yeah, I mean, this one's very, very unpleasant, obviously, but it is a great way to really lock our opponent down. And really, like anything in jiu-jitsu, if we can cause our opponent to be stressed, panic, and move erratically, we can greatly improve our chances of getting to a superior position or gaining a submission much, much quicker. And like Placido will tell you, very, very uncomfortable, especially once we secure that leg. Chin strap, elbow tie, I start running and reaching for that leg. And remember, sometimes you're going to lose that, sometimes you're going to miss it, but just come back to the elbow. So as I'm moving, I miss the leg, you keep circling. Eventually, we're going to have a pretty good chance of catching the leg. So remember, we replace our hand with our leg. We drop the knee to the floor and allow our head to pop out, immediately pulling it back down to attaining our rear body lock. So a great, great one to slow someone down that's very, very explosive or very experienced from that position. All right, guys. So we have the misdirectional style go behind here. Again, these things work well in combination, right? So obviously, one of the previous ones we did was the head block go behind, and Placido, or your training partner, if you've hit him with that before, understands that what's crucial to that go behind is that I get control of his foot, right? So as I'm circling and Placido's circling, he knows that I need to get this foot to complete the go behind, right? So obviously, what's he gonna do? He's gonna do the only thing he can do, and that's circle to keep that foot out of range. No matter how perfect my technique here is, there's nothing I can do to stop him moving completely. So as I chase this foot, he circles and circles and circles, right? Staying safe. He's not escaping, but he's remaining safe for the time being. So we can take advantage of that. Again, on the assumption and the dilemma that Placido knows if I get that foot, he's in trouble. So I can throw his momentum off of the chin strap and come in for a rear body lock. The trick to walking quick, again, like in the last video, is we're walking on our side. We're not walking square. So you can see the slowness of movement, right? So as I'm chasing Placido, trying to reach for this foot, I can come into a square stance, throw his chin past, and secure the rear body lock. So we'll do it slow. I'm circling. I'm trying to reach that foot. And we bowl him past to secure it. It's the exact same as the misdirectional from the 4-point position. So for extra reference, we can go back and take a look at that. But just understand that a tight chin strap is amazing control over someone. We're controlling the end of the lever of the spine, we're controlling the neck. And obviously that runs through the whole body. So if we throw that, especially in the direction they're already moving, we can make them move really quite far. And again, somewhat of an unexpected defense, but an unexpected offense, but really we can hit it because we know which direction Placido is going to be moving based on the dilemma of trying to catch that leg. So we chase the leg, he defends it, we bowl. It looks unorthodox, but it is very, very effective.